love to fall in love. I just want to fall in love. And I think love is what you want. I think it's an honest thing to say, and it's really simple, and it doesn't matter whether you're age 4 or you're age 90 or 110, you understand what that sentence means. And then I was taught by my tutor to say, if one was to have the opinion of, and then you can say whatever you like, but of course that isn't honest, is it? That's just some sort of grammatic term to make yourself sound more polite. I am from the first person, I am me, and this is where my art comes from. And if I was to try and circumnavigate that, it wouldn't be real and it wouldn't be genuine. So I've got more chance of producing these pieces than I have running down the street naked with a Union Jack, definitely. So, I've changed, my body's changed, my mind's changed, but it's not changing, it's like a Dickensian thing. It's like, wax. The candle is still there, just the wax changes its form. It's much more like that. I'm still here, except I've changed, I've morphed into something different, but the essence of me still retains the same thing. I'm not a girl anymore, I'm a woman. It's that simple. It's not difficult. Yeah, well, I didn't refuse. I couldn't do it. I couldn't possibly recreate something that I'd made in my tiny co-op flat in Waterloo, that I'd hand-stitched, that had taken me 6 months, that was made out of all my old clothes. And made out of my grandmother's night dresses, made out of all my old clothes. There was no way I could recreate that feeling for me about how I made it and why.
The first quilt I ever made, I took it with me everywhere. And I found that working on this quilt in school board meetings allowed old family, old rancher, coastal people who saw me as kind of a radical, almost troublemaker, perhaps, that the quilt became a bridge where they could come up and speak to me and say, my grandmother made that quilt. She made that same pattern. It was different colors. Suddenly there's this bond between people who may not have other things in common. I work in the top of a barn. I use it as a refuge. It's far enough away from the house so that if I tell my husband and son, take messages, I don't want to come to the phone, they will leave me alone. The bird quilt actually started out with a horse. The first block I made was a horse. And, I was the very normal horse-crazy adolescent girl in my teens. And, the girls that drew horses in their notebooks at school all the time. And so the first block was a horse. The second one was the chicken. I've always liked chickens and ducks and geese. I love to see chickens scratching. Chickens are very kind of ridiculous. They're very maternal. There's some mixture of the wild and the domestic. Birds appear in my dreams all the time. I'm fascinated by the symbolism of birds. And so birds as a subject matter just come naturally. I find it much easier to draw chickens than people. It's not loaded with the same, it's not a likeness. Who can tell but me? That's an interesting thing to sort of look at the incidents in your life and say, what myth am I living out? That desire to make something that says, this is mine and I made it. I think quilting comes very close to being play. Maybe that's a cop-out, I don't know. I enjoy the sort of backdoor approach that quilts represent. It's interesting if you're thoughtful to say, what is it that is so pleasing about cutting out, because you can, nowadays we buy yard goods, cut them up in little pieces, and then sew them back together, and it's ridiculous on one level. Why do that? Except there is something very basic, the urge to make pattern, and the repetitive patterns. I think they probably function a little bit the way mantras and mandalas do in Eastern religion. They speak to something very deep. But I think probably many husbands would find their wives' obsessions, somewhat of a drag some of the time. I think my family are really quite supportive. It's not a passion with them, and it is a passion with me.
When I retired, I thought I was going to die because I couldn't get my mind turned around, and I couldn't do anything. I didn't want to do anything, so I bought a blasted old TV. Lord help me. I thought I could never, ever. It took me 1 year to settle down. I just left Chicago and came out here. When you're away from everyone you know, There's nothing else to do then, you see, and you concentrate on what you love to do. I decided then I would finally make a quilt. I always made things because Mother made things. Get up, girls. If the sun's in the heavens, what are we going to do today? You don't know the possibilities of creation till you go dive in and challenge yourself and guide yourself. It's like love. It's love. I arrange my fabrics according to colors. It's like a palette. You must know what you have. And by cutting the squares or the triangles, I can see my complete available palette. The point is to have meaningful colors. Some fabrics are uglier than sin, which I wouldn't have. I would throw them away if they happen to appear in my closet because they're ugly. They're distracting. All these years of teaching, I was happy and I tried to make all my students happy. One of my students sent me a letter and said art wouldn't be the same without me. Can you imagine? In order to arrange these, I have to have a board of some sort. You use felt. Felt's the best thing because the squares, any shapes you're using, will stick to the felt. It adheres, there's enough friction, and I can move it. And you have to learn in your creation to use form and movement and rhythm, and you have to make a unit, however little and unimportant it is. You get close values and contrasting values, then you'll get an all-over effect in which there's a sort of a blurred center in here, something like a painting. But I like to have all kinds of fun, and I like a little vibration, titillation, and shimmering. And after a while, I'm just all shimmers, which is ridiculous because everything falls apart if you just shimmer and do nothing else in this world. Then you pick up a fabric that's a little more quiet and use it. The thing is, ever so often, in order to have a restful area in this world, you have to be quiet, right? Sit down and shut up.
I was experiencing difficulties in my work as a painter. In addition, my children were growing up and I was moving away from them physically. My marriage wasn't working very well at the time. So I was really looking around for something, I don't know what. And I came upon quilts. I made one, then I made another. I felt good about it, and anyone who saw them began to tell me, make more, don't stop, this is your thing. I was suddenly being taken seriously by all the important persons in my life, and this hadn't happened to me before. So I felt authentic, and I spoke for myself in a new way, and I was listened to in a new way. So you could actually say I was getting my voice by staying with the quilts and living out the issues that they represented. I like to sew and I like to piece by hand, and there's no reason why I should not go on doing it, except that the extreme demands on women's time is something that I have tried to fight, and in my work I fight it in trying to reduce the work by doing some of it by machine. And to my quilts, it makes them hardy and resilient, and I accept this without any compunction.
I had this in my mind for 13 years. It's a whole cloth hand applique. So all of the black on this fabric was cut out from one piece of fabric. Hawaiian quilt traditionally is never sat on and is never slept under. This quilt is a silver sword. on my second vacation to Hawaii in the spring of 1987, 4 months before I moved here. I took a 1 day long hike through Haleakala Crater on the island of Maui. In that crater is this, to me, the most amazing plant and flower in the entire earth. In Hawaiian, the center of the quilt, the center of our belly button is called our piko. Piko is the center of the earth. All creation in the Hawaiian mythology, all creation comes out of the piko. I never quilt for a deadline. I never quilt with the goal of finishing a quilt. A Hawaiian quilt, I've got to get up higher. A Hawaiian quilt comes from the heart. And I'm real funny about my quilts, my Hawaiian quilts. When I finish them, it's like I didn't have children, but these are my children. And when I'm done, off to college, go. I want to give them away. I don't want to. I'm Paul. I had you. I raised you. You're done. Go live your life. I care where it goes and what happens to it, but it's not my business anymore. Wherever the quilt. I am so, okay, let's do it. I want it done now. I am so just everything that I ever wanted to do in life. I want to get there and have it done now. Exact, complete, total opposite. Hawaiian quilting has taught me patience. Quilting is meditation. Eyes awake, but that turn of the thread, I've counted once through the applique and then the quilting. My quilts have approximately 400,000 stitches. Each one by hand, each one an act of love, each one a meditation, each one a prayer with needle and thread.
I was commissioned to do 2 quilts using the clothes of a girl that had died, and I would have said no if I didn't have the impression that for the mother it was an important thing to happen. It wasn't a mere question of her remembering her daughter, it was a question of her putting her to rest. So she needed some sort of ceremony that she could not find anywhere else and which the conventional funeral hadn't provided. And she needed somebody with her. And so I was interacting with her. I was helping face the situation. And she couldn't do this, apparently, with any of the members of her family. And still I had the feeling that the main thing had been her interaction with me, and that the quilt was only a memorial to what had happened between us. For me, quilts carry a lot of emotion. I guess I was working through all sorts of prohibitions to touch. Touch is important to women because there is a lot of physical caring that they have to do, and this makes them extremely sensitive, touchy, you might say. And this is why objects that involve the sense of touch have a special meaning emotionally. Quilts have had a meaning for me on many levels. Making quilts helped me to get a sense for my own space, a sense of finding my way, a sense of really working my way out of a labyrinth. Quilts were a home for me as a first-generation American.
Having the radio on, listening to the news, this quilt was my way of documenting the things which we were hearing, and often concepts that had never come up in our whole lifetime. I started using things that I had to hand because we weren't going out to shops. So I started cutting up things like souvenir tea towels, serviettes, because I didn't have that particular colour pink. I worked pieces of embroidery into there that had been given from my mother-in-law's travels. We were in a situation where we had to use what we had, and my practice focuses on that in a lot of ways, but more so in this time when we were stuck at home. I purposely chose a lot of very pretty florals because from a distance, it doesn't look as serious as it is when you become closer to the quilt. There are ideas like flu-like symptoms. That's what we were told at the beginning of the pandemic that to look out for. It became known as the blue plague. So these things, they're really heavy, they're really weighty, and airborne sickness started to piece ideas and sentences and build them around and around and around the centre panel, which says "gone viral." So I enjoy thinking of play on words as well. Working on this quilt was something that I could really focus in on and control. It was something that I could do and control when there was so much that we couldn't control. The words become tangible, they become real. It was a real situation we were living in. It wasn't a movie, it wasn't science fiction. Home sweet home, well, that's tongue-in-cheek, you know. We were going crazy within our four walls, and we're very lucky to live in a comfortable home with a lot of space. We have a lot to be grateful for, and there's a lot of reflection on that fact in this quilt as well. It felt like work because it was something I returned to each day while the children were busy with their schooling, and it felt like something that I had to do because of the things that were happening around us. It was almost a compulsion to make a tangible record of the things that we were hearing. I like the idea that the work that'll be left after I'm gone is reflective of the time and place it was made in. And I really like the idea of creating a composition, stitching a canvas, if you like, that is also an object which has a function.
If you've got to do your time, you've got to find something to do. Otherwise, it's just you'll get more violence, more drug taking. This gets their mind off of that. It gets the mind off of the environment, I think.
For me, it helps while I'm thinking, and it just relaxes your mind and calms you down.
Obviously, what I've done is a terrible thing. Sewing helped me feel like that I'm more in control of myself. When we were talking about the V&A project, I wanted to design something which is different. I thought of a hectagon, because if you go to the centre of the wing, it's the shape of a hectagon. So I think that was very important.
This is the view of my window where I can't go nowhere else. And I just thought that if this is all I can see, this is my life, and I've got to try and get myself out of it.
So there was one particular piece which was very simply stitched, and it was quite interesting because the guy who'd actually stitched it said, well, normally when you come to a new home, and prison is your new home, you're given a bunch of flowers, but what you're actually given when you enter prison is a bunch of numbers. Another piece just focused on 3 pairs of legs with trainers. And the person who stitched that said, well, trainers is the only mark of individuality that you can actually have in prison.